My parents cut me off when I married my husband, but now that I'm pregnant, they're suddenly trying to worm their way back into my life. I, 28F, have always had a rocky relationship with my parents, especially when it came to their expectations for my future. Growing up in a wealthy suburb, I was constantly compared to my older sister, Sophie, 30F, who excelled at everything. She got straight A's in school and went on to become a successful lawyer at a prestigious firm in New York. In contrast, I was always more creative and free-spirited. I did well enough academically, but gravitated towards art and literature, which my parents never really valued. My family is what you would call old money. My father, Charles, 60M, is a successful businessman, and my mother, Linda, 58F, comes from an equally wealthy family. My mother was mostly involved in charity work, but it always felt like it was more about maintaining her social standing than helping others. They were obsessed with our family's reputation and status. From the moment I was born, my parents had a roadmap for my life. I was expected to attend an Ivy League university, preferably Harvard like my father, major in business or law, marry someone from an influential family, and eventually work in the family business alongside Sophie. But that life wasn't for me. I always loved the arts, painting, writing, and going to museums. My parents saw these interests as hobbies that wouldn't lead to anything serious or successful. They pushed me towards things they felt were more respectable, like tennis lessons and internships at my dad's company. When I got accepted into Brown University, they were disappointed that it wasn't Harvard, but were willing to settle for it. They believed that being surrounded by the right people would eventually put me back on the path they had envisioned for me. But little did they know that Brown was where I would meet someone who would change my life. I met Ethan, 29M, during my sophomore year. We literally ran into each other at the campus coffee shop. He was carrying a tray of drinks for his study group, and I wasn't paying attention. The coffee spilled everywhere, but instead of getting mad, Ethan just laughed and made a joke about it being a messy meet-cute. We ended up skipping our classes and talking for hours. Ethan was from a working-class family in Ohio. His dad worked at a factory, and his mom was a waitress. He was attending Brown on a full scholarship and working part-time jobs to support himself. He was studying to be a teacher because he wanted to make a difference in kids' lives. I was immediately drawn to Ethan. He was kind, funny, and driven. Everything my parents wouldn't approve of, which only made me more attracted to him. With Ethan, I felt seen and understood for the first time. He encouraged me to pursue my passion for graphic design. Unlike my parents, who never took my creative ambitions seriously, my parents disliked Ethan from the moment they met him. This happened during Parents' Weekend in our junior year. I had delayed introducing them because I knew it would go badly, but eventually, I had no choice. As expected, it was a disaster. My parents couldn't get past the fact that Ethan wasn't from a wealthy background. To them, he was just a poor boy trying to climb the social ladder by dating me. My mom made snide comments about his appearance and career choice, even asking him if he was sure he wanted to be just a teacher. My dad barely acknowledged Ethan and spoke only to me, making it clear that he didn't approve. They assumed Ethan was after our money. When I defended him, pointing out his scholarship and work ethic, my dad dismissively said, "Oh, honey, don't be so naive. Boys like that always have an agenda." Despite their disapproval, Ethan and I continued to date. We supported each other through the stress of school and celebrated our milestones together. After we graduated, Ethan proposed to me during a camping trip. It was simple, just the two of us by a campfire, but it was perfect. He said, "I may not be able to give you the luxurious life you grew up with, but I promise to love you and be there for you in every way. Will you marry me?" Without hesitation, I said yes. When I told my parents about the engagement, they were furious. My mom cried, saying I was throwing my life away, while my dad ranted about how I was making the biggest mistake of my life. They gave me an ultimatum: break up with Ethan or be cut off financially. "If you're determined to live like a commoner, you can do it without our money," my dad said coldly. I was stunned. I had expected them to be upset, but I hadn't anticipated such a harsh reaction. In that moment, I realized that their love had always been conditional. I chose Ethan, and we had a small, intimate wedding with only a few close friends. It wasn't the grand wedding my parents had dreamed of for me, but it was perfect for us. Sophie didn't attend the wedding. She sided with our parents, telling me I was making a huge mistake. The day after the wedding, I received a formal letter from my parents' lawyer informing me that I had been cut out of their will and that Sophie was now the sole heir. The letter also stated that I was no longer welcome in the family home and that any further attempts to contact them would be handled legally. The pain of being cut off was sharp, not because of the loss of money, but because my parents chose their status and expectations over me. For the next 3 years, I had no contact with my family. I tried reaching out a few times, sending birthday cards and leaving voicemails, but they never responded. Eventually, I gave up. Ethan and I built a life together. He worked as a high school teacher, and I found a job as a graphic designer at a small agency. We bought a modest home and adopted a dog. We were happy. We didn't have the luxuries I grew up with, but we had each other, and that was more than enough. Then, 3 years after our wedding, I found out I was pregnant. Ethan and I were ecstatic. We hadn't been actively trying for a baby, but we both wanted children. Once we were past the first trimester, we started telling friends and were excited to start this new chapter in our lives. A week after we shared the news, I received a text message from Sophie. It was the first time I had heard from her in years. The message was brief. Mom and Dad heard about the baby. They want to talk. Call them. I was shocked. How had they found out? I hadn't told anyone in the family, and we didn't have mutual friends who could have passed on the information. After talking it over with Ethan, I decided to call them. Maybe the idea of becoming grandparents had softened their hearts. When I called, my mother answered. The conversation was stiff. She congratulated me on the pregnancy and said they wanted to be part of their grandchild's life. But there was no apology for the way they had treated me. Just talk of expensive baby gifts they wanted to send. A top-of-the-line stroller, custom crib, designer clothes, and even a new car. I was stunned. The gifts they mentioned were extravagant and worth more than $10,000. It felt like they were trying to buy their way back into my life. I politely declined, saying that Ethan and I were already preparing for the baby and didn't need such lavish items. My mom became upset. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "You can't possibly provide for this child the way we can. We're just trying to help." The conversation ended on a tense note. My mom insisted they would send the gifts anyway, and that they expected to be involved in their grandchild's life. Not once did she ask how I was feeling or how the pregnancy was going. Ethan was furious when I told him. He felt like my parents were trying to undermine us by showing they could provide things we couldn't. "They're trying to buy their way back into our lives," he said, "and once we accept their help, they'll think they can control how we raise our child." Part of me still wanted to believe that my parents had changed. "Maybe they're trying to make things right," I said. Ethan asked, "Do you really think that? Or are you just hoping it's true because you miss them?" He was right. I missed them, the family dinners, the holiday traditions, and the good times we used to have. But I couldn't forget how they had abandoned me when I chose to follow my heart instead of their plan. Sophie, on the other hand, was relentless. She bombarded me with texts, alternating between guilt trips and excited messages about becoming an aunt. She didn't understand why I was hesitant to reconcile with our parents. "They're trying to make amends," she insisted. "Why can't you just let the past go?" But it wasn't that simple. The past shaped who I had become and led me to make the choices I did. Ethan kept reminding me, "We're doing just fine on our own. Our child will have everything they need: love, security, and 2 parents who adore them." I'm now 16 weeks pregnant, but instead of fully enjoying it, I'm stressed out. The gifts are still sitting in the garage, waiting for us to decide what to do. Ethan wants to donate them to a women's shelter, but I'm hesitating. Once we do that, it feels like we're closing the door on any chance of reconciliation for good. Sophie continues to send me pictures of baby clothes and nursery ideas, pretending as if nothing is wrong. My parents haven't reached out directly since sending the gifts, but I know they're waiting for me to make a move. The pressure from extended family members is also increasing. Aunts, uncles, and cousins have started calling me, encouraging me to make amends. "They're your parents," my Aunt Barbara told me. "Of course they want to spoil their grandchild. Why are you being so stubborn?" I tried to explain the years of silence, the hurt, and how this all felt like a power play rather than genuine remorse, but people who haven't lived through it don't understand. Ethan continues to support me no matter what. though he constantly reminds me we don't need their money or their approval. Our child will have everything she needs because she has us. At 32 weeks pregnant, I know we need to make a decision soon. We can't leave those gifts gathering dust in the garage forever, and we have to start preparing for the baby's arrival. But every time I think I've made up my mind, doubt creeps in, and I wonder if I'm making the right choice. We've even discussed the possibility of seeing a family counselor to help navigate this complicated situation. Maybe a neutral third party could provide insight and guide us through this mess. But for now, we're trying to focus on the positive aspects of my pregnancy and the excitement of becoming parents. I just hope that whatever decision we make, it's the right one for our daughter. Update 1. It's been about a month since I last shared an update, and a lot has happened. Ethan and I finally decided to decline my parents' gifts. After long discussions, we both agreed that it wasn't healthy to accept their help, given the way they tried to manipulate the situation. I called my mother and gently explained that while we appreciated the gesture, we weren't comfortable accepting such expensive gifts. I suggested that if they truly wanted to reconnect, we could start with small steps. Perhaps a family dinner where we could talk things through. My mom didn't take it well. She accused me of being ungrateful and stubborn, insisting that I was depriving my child of the opportunities only they could provide. "You're making a huge mistake," she said, her voice cold. "One day, you'll regret this when your child doesn't have the advantages we can give." I held my ground. I told her that Ethan and I were perfectly capable of providing for our child, and that what we wanted most from them wasn't material things, but a genuine relationship built on respect. The call ended abruptly with my mom hanging up. I thought that would be the end of it, but a few days later, a truck arrived at our house filled with all the extravagant gifts my mom had mentioned: the stroller, crib, clothes, and even the new car keys she had hinted at. Attached to the car was a note: "For our grandchild, we won't let your stubbornness deprive them of the best." Ethan and I were speechless. We didn't know what to do. It felt like an outright violation of our boundaries. We decided to store everything in the garage while we figured out how to handle the situation. Ethan was adamant about sending everything back or donating it, but I hesitated again. Things got even more complicated when Sophie showed up at our house unannounced. She was bubbling with excitement about the baby and the gifts, acting as if there was no tension between us. Isn't it amazing? Mom and Dad are so excited to be grandparents. They just want to help. I tried explaining why we felt uncomfortable accepting the gifts, but she just didn't get it. "Why are you being so difficult?" she asked, clearly frustrated. "Most people would love to get such generous gifts. You're acting like they're the enemy." Our conversation escalated into an argument. Sophie accused me of holding on to old grudges and punishing our parents for things that were in the past. "They're trying to make amends," she insisted. "Why can't you just let go and accept their love?" I lost my temper. "Love?" I snapped. "Is that what you call ignoring me for years and then trying to buy their way back into my life? That's not love, Sophie. It's control." Sophie stormed out, telling me I was making a huge mistake and warning me that if I kept pushing them away, I'd be the one to blame for our child not having grandparents. On top of all this, our extended family members started weighing in, encouraging me to reconcile with my parents. "They just want to be involved," Aunt Barbara said during one frustrating call. "Why are you making this harder than it has to be?" No matter how much I explained, they didn't seem to understand. They hadn't lived through the years of hurt and manipulation. Throughout it all, Ethan remained my rock, constantly reminding me, "We've built a great life without their help. We don't need them to raise our child. I'm now 32 weeks pregnant, and instead of fully enjoying this time, I feel more stressed than ever." The gifts are still sitting in the garage, untouched. Ethan wants to donate everything to a shelter, but I'm still not sure. Every time I try to make a final decision, doubts creep in. What if I'm making a mistake? What if this is the last chance for reconciliation? Ethan and I have even started discussing seeing a counselor to help us through this. Maybe an objective perspective could help us decide the best path forward. But for now, I'm focusing on the little joys of my pregnancy and trying to block out the drama as much as I can. Final update. It's been 6 months since my last update, and things have finally come to a resolution. A lot has happened, and I've had to make some tough choices. After weeks of wrestling with my emotions, Ethan and I decided to see a family counselor. We went to several sessions, both together and separately, and the experience was eye-opening. The counselor helped us sort through our feelings and guided us towards setting healthy boundaries with my family. Meanwhile, the pressure from my family only intensified. My parents, frustrated by our lack of response, began showing up at our house unannounced. They would knock on the door for hours, demanding to talk to me. It was incredibly stressful, especially as my pregnancy progressed, and I was dealing with all the physical challenges that come with it. Sophie continued her relentless guilt tripping, sending daily texts about how I was destroying the family. She even threatened to cut me out of her life if I didn't make amends with our parents. The turning point came when I was about 32 weeks pregnant. My parents showed up at my workplace, causing a scene in the lobby. They demanded to see me, insisting that they had a right to be part of their grandchild's life. My coworkers were uncomfortable, and my boss had to step in and ask them to leave, threatening to call the police if they didn't. That was the moment I knew things had gone too far. My parents hadn't changed. They were still trying to control me regardless of my boundaries or wishes. This wasn't about love or reconciliation. It was about getting their way, no matter what. After talking it through with Ethan and our counselor, we made the decision to cut off all contact with my parents and Sophie. We sent a formal cease and desist letter through a lawyer, stating that any further attempts to contact us would be considered harassment. We also donated all the baby gifts to a women's shelter. It was difficult to let go, but it felt like the right thing to do. We didn't want our daughter's life to be entangled with the strings my parents would have attached. After sending the letter, I blocked my parents and Sophie on all platforms. It was incredibly hard, but also liberating. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Our daughter Emily was born 2 months ago. The birth was difficult, and there were moments when I wished I could have leaned on my mom for support. But Ethan was amazing throughout the entire process, and we made it through together. Parenthood has been both challenging and wonderful. Emily is the light of our lives, and watching Ethan bond with her makes me fall in love with him all over again. No, we don't have the lavish things my parents wanted to give us, but we have love, and that's more than enough. As I look at Emily, I know we made the right choice. I want her to grow up surrounded by unconditional love, not judgment and control. I want her to know that she is valued for who she is, not what she has. This journey hasn't been easy, but I have no regrets. Ethan, Emily, and I are moving forward, focusing on our family and the life we've built. Thank you to everyone who offered support and advice. Your kindness meant the world to us during such a difficult time. Here's to new beginnings and choosing happiness, even when it's the harder path. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed our stories and would like to hear more, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you captivating tales and new content every week. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We appreciate every one of you for being a part of our storytelling journey.